Imagine a life filled with ordinary moments. Then suddenly the past knocks on your door. Suddenly you're flooded with forgotten memories, revealing secrets you never knew you were keeping from yourself. Eileen Franklin and her father George are the most famous examples of that. Their twisted family tale is the center of the new Showtime docu-series Buried. Eileen claims that in 1969, she watched George molest and murder her best friend, Susan Nason. But Eileen was 8 at the time. She repressed the traumatic memory for 20 years. It wasn't until she gazed into the eyes of her 5-year-old daughter that the memories came rushing back. The way the sun cut through the trees, George on top of Susan in the back of their Volkswagen van, him standing over her with a rock, crushing the side of her skull. Eileen's story sent her father to jail for the rest of his life. But 6 years later, a judge overruled it. Eileen's repressed memories were called into question. So was Eileen Franklin telling the truth? Or did she remember the story thanks to information she got from newspapers? Was there a financial motive? Did she want her 15 minutes of fame? Or did she want to see her depraved, sexually abusive father finally get what he deserved? Thanks for watching True Crime Recaps. I'm Amy. Be sure to stick with us all the way to the end because there are so many twists and turns in this bizarre tale, and I don't want you to miss a thing. Let's recap. Eileen Franklin, now 29 and married with children, is sitting in the living room with her son and daughter. She looks into her 5-year-old daughter's eyes and suddenly, all the memories are back. She fights them at first because she can hardly believe them herself, but they refuse to be ignored. She finally tells her husband, Barry, who calls the police. He says his wife has witnessed a murder, but she's afraid to come forward. The officers say, okay, we'll do what we can to protect you, but she has to tell us what happened. They can't arrest anyone without a statement. Over a series of phone calls, Eileen agrees to talk in person. 2 detectives arrive at their Los Angeles area home. Now, the details come to her in stops and starts, but this is the story that she eventually remembers. It's a Monday, September 22nd, 1969. Her father George is driving Eileen and her sister Janice to school. That's when they see 8-year-old Susan walking alone. Well, Eileen asks, can we pick up my friend? For some reason, George makes Janice get out of his Volkswagen van so Susan can get in. You see, George's van doesn't have back seats. Instead, it has a wooden platform with a thin mattress, like a makeshift bed. The trio drive to school, but at the last minute, George changes the plan. He says, you know what, girls? We're going to be playing hooky today. So they keep driving until George pulls off the main road and heads for the hills of Half Moon Bay, a beach community south of San Francisco, roughly 15 miles from their home in Foster City. They pull into an isolated area. Susan and Eileen are playing while George sits there and watches. Eventually, the girls climb back in the van. They're like jumping on the bed. Whatever. But that's when George joins in. Eileen remembers him lying on top of Susan, pinning her down and pulling up her dress. He begins to rub his pelvis back and forth on hers. So Eileen curls up in a ball in the passenger seat until George finishes. Then Susan leaves the van crying and she sits down about 20 or 30 feet away. The next thing Eileen remembers, her father is standing over Susan, holding a rock in his hand above his head. Eileen watches as George brings the rock down twice. The cracking of bones makes her scream. After the attack, George pushes Eileen to the ground and threatens to kill her if she ever says a word. And then he makes her help him pull the mattress out of the van. She never sees what he does with it. She tells police that Susan was wearing a silver ring with a stone in it when George attacked her. When the rock came crashing down, it crushed her right hand and broke the ring. Now, this is shocking information about a long-gone cold case. Susan Nason disappeared from Foster City, California on September 22nd, 1969. Search parties and neighborhood volunteers, including George Franklin, combed the area but turned up nothing. Then, 2 months later, on December 2nd, an employee for the San Francisco Water Department finds Susan's decomposed body under a mattress near the Crystal Spring Reservoir. It's in a ravine about 35 feet below Half Moon Bay Road, where Eileen says the murder took place. Susan's body is so decomposed that dental records are their only means of identifying her. Sadly, her mother recognizes the homemade dress that Susan was wearing when she was last seen. Because of the decay, they can't tell if Susan was sexually assaulted. However, the dent above her right ear suggests that she was killed by blunt force trauma, possibly from a large rock. Other than that, police don't have any other evidence. The case had more questions than answers, and eventually it went cold. Eileen's family moved away from the area a few years later. Now, fast forward to November 1989, the detectives compare Eileen's story to Susan's discovery. The rock, the smashed right hand, the ring, the head injury, it all lines up. They're convinced she really did witness this murder. When they show up at George's house to talk to him about Susan's death, George says, "Did you talk to my daughter?" But Eileen isn't the first to accuse George of Susan Nason's murder. Her older sister, Janice, went to the police 5 years earlier. Now, Janice didn't mention seeing Susan in George's van that day, but she did claim her father used to play a lot of those creepy touch me games with Susan and Eileen, and he often drove around the area where the little girl's body was found. Back then, when the police spoke to Janice about Susan's disappearance, she says her father kicked her as a warning to keep quiet. She always had a feeling her father was the killer, but she couldn't offer police much more than that. It was Eileen's shocking eyewitness account that led to his arrest. Well, her repressed memories were enough to bring George Franklin to trial. She sat across from her father on the witness stand and told the jury everything she remembered. Eileen explained that she grew up in awe of her father. He was a firefighter who was known around the neighborhood as a charming flirt. There were 5 kids in the Franklin family, 4 of them girls, but Eileen was Daddy's favorite. George often took her on little outings, just the 2 of them, but he had a dark side. A search of his house turned up stacks of books and magazines about pedophilia, incest, and bestiality. They found sex toys the police described as child-sized. Now, former girlfriends backed up those conclusions. George admitted he'd had sex with his daughter, and he allegedly asked at least one woman if he could have sex with hers too. The memory of Susan's murder opened the floodgates. Eileen began remembering all these sick things that her father did to her when no one was watching. And I mean sick. Both Eileen and her sister Janice testified under oath that George sexually abused both of them. The entire Franklin family was terrified of George. To everyone else, he was a great guy, but behind closed doors, he was allegedly a monster. Molesting his own daughters was just the start. He was a violent drunk, an abusive, controlling man with a temper that turned on a dime. A real Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde type. At his trial, Eileen and Janice said that their mother also had always suspected George had something to do with Susan's murder. Now, she and George separated in 1974, but she was too afraid to tell the police about him. The jury decided Eileen's story was enough to convict George of Susan's murder. He was sentenced to life in prison in November 1990. Now, after the trial, Eileen became the heroine of the Repressed Memories movement. She hit the talk show circuit. Oprah, 60 Minutes, Larry King. She co-authored a book titled Sins of My Father. Then in 1992, actress Shelley Long played Eileen in a made-for-TV movie called Fatal Memories. The case opened up the floodgates for other horrifying stories. Some celebrities even got involved. LaToya Jackson famously accused her father of molesting her and her sister. The Jackson family denied all allegations. That same year, Roseanne Barr said she was the victim of incest. Repressed memories were definitely trending in the early to mid-90s. Then everything flipped on its head in 1996 when George was released from prison. A judge determined that he didn't get a fair trial. Not necessarily because he was convicted based on repressed memories. Not really that at all. But one of the biggest flaws had to do with the newspaper articles the original judge wouldn't allow. As it turns out, most, if not all, of Eileen's story could be gleaned from newspaper articles that covered Susan's murder. George's defense team laid it out pretty well, but the judge wouldn't let them run with it at the trial. Eileen's story hinged on 3 key details: the rock, the shattered ring, and the mattress. A prosecutor said Eileen couldn't possibly know those things unless she was there, but that wasn't exactly true. Anybody with the newspaper could have learned about every detail. The thing is, Eileen said that she didn't learn about it from the newspaper. She specifically told them, because they did ask, "Did you read about this in the papers?" And she was like, "No, I did not read about this in the papers." And they're like, "Okay, let's go to trial." And they won until 1996. One paper said Susan's body was covered by a mattress. But another one said it was a box spring, but a box spring was too big to fit in George's van. In her original statement, Eileen said Susan's body was covered with the mattress. 6 months later, she changed it to a thing. Eileen also got the time of day wrong in her original story. She claims they picked Susan up on the way to school, but that wasn't accurate. Susan had already gone to school and come home before she went missing. In fact, she came home around 3 p.m. and said hello to her mother, and then she left to return a pair of tennis shoes that she'd borrowed from a friend. Her mother kissed her goodbye around 3:15, and the friend saw her, she got the tennis shoes from her, and that was the last person they think to see her alive. Although several neighbors recall seeing her walking down the sidewalk around that time. Eventually, Eileen changed the time of day in her story to match the facts. She also altered her sister Janice's role in the story. Instead of being in the van and told to get out, Eileen said she simply saw Janice in a field. Well, memory is a funny thing. Don't you think? I mean, roughly 52% of wrongful convictions are the result of false eyewitness testimony. In most cases, it's not because people are lying. It's because memory is subjective. It'll fool you. Your brain doesn't save everything you see, hear, touch, taste, feel. It only records the most important details. The rest is filled in with fluff, you could say. And repressed memories are even trickier. Sigmund Freud, the godfather of psychoanalysis, coined the concept over a century ago. Imagine you're deathly scared of basements. You have no idea why. You just know that the idea of going down those stairs is terrifying. Even though you can't actively remember something horrible happening in the basement, in this case. But Freud claimed that just the idea that you have these memories about it, repressed in your subconscious, that's still going to influence your daily life. Except in this case, the sight of George in his van never triggered Eileen's memories about the murder or the sex abuse. It was only 20 years later that it all came back to her. But if you believe the sex abuse is real, and it certainly seems to be, are all Eileen's recovered memories accurate? The real bombshell dropped when her sister Janice revealed a major secret. Eileen and Janice had a falling out after their father's conviction, but Janice came forward and said Eileen had been under hypnosis when the repressed memories came back. Under California law, testimony that comes from hypnosis is not allowed in court. Eileen, however, swore under oath that she was never put under hypnosis. I mean, the only time she ever talked about hypnosis, she said, was about weight loss, but she didn't even do it. She was just talking about it. But all of that may have been a lie. In August 1989, Eileen told her brother that she was hypnotized during therapy. This is before the trial. It was only while under hypnosis, she said she visualized her father killing Susan. She told her mother and sister the same thing in September. But after George was arrested, Eileen called her brother and begged him not to mention hypnosis. If the police asked, just say it all came back to her all of a sudden. And then Eileen changed her story again. She said she lied to her family about being hypnotized in the first place. Now, hypnotism made it easier, she said, to explain how and why she was remembering all these awful things all these years later. Unfortunately, it also makes it hard to know when she's telling the truth and when she's lying. Then there's the possible financial motive. See, everyone wanted a piece of Eileen's story, especially Hollywood. She admitted that her husband, Barry, wanted to keep the money while she wanted to donate it to charity. Well, George's legal team believes that Barry pushed Eileen toward calling the police so that they could cash in on the book of movie deals. Eileen's credibility took another hit when she allegedly unlocked another repressed memory. This time, it was George raping and killing 18-year-old Veronica Cassio and 17-year-old Paula Baxter. Veronica's body was discovered in a creek on a local golf course on January 8, 1976. She'd been stabbed over 30 times, and apparently Eileen was there to witness it again. See, Paula Baxter was found a month later behind a local church. She'd been violated, stabbed, and bludgeoned to death. But George had a rock-solid alibi. He was at a union meeting when Veronica died. And furthermore, DNA from the semen found on Veronica did not match George. It belonged to Rodney Halbauer. He was eventually convicted for the murders of both Paula and Veronica. Now, there's no doubt that George was a monster who abused his family. If his daughters and others say he was a pedophile, then he probably was. But did he kill Susan Nason? Unfortunately, Eileen never got another chance to put him in prison. The hypnosis scandal meant that Eileen could not testify at George's retrial. So without a leg to stand on, the prosecution dropped the charges. George was a free man as of 1996, and he died in 2016. Some believe the whole repressed memory saga was actually an attempt at revenge, trying to give George the justice he deserved for all of the sex abuse. However, it may have severely damaged people's opinions of repressed memories. Even today, experts can't agree on the subject. Some say victims shouldn't have to provide proof of these memories. Others think it's nonsense, and these repressed memories are the result of suggestive therapy. As of 2023, nobody knows for sure who killed Susan Nason. Buried director Ari Pines still thinks George could have done it. In an interview with Oxygen, he said, "Everyone in that family suspected him for a good reason. He was a pedophile, he knew the victim, he lived close by, but it's very hard to reach any certainty in this case. There's just not a lot of evidence. Only Eileen's memories." Well, Eileen did not want to appear in the Buried documentary. According to the show, she changed her name and she moved to a new state. She's been widowed twice and she wants to remain anonymous.
And that's your recap.
Thanks for hanging out with us today.
If you like getting all the crime in half the time, go ahead and tap that subscribe button and the bell so you never miss a story.
We're here Wednesdays, Saturdays, and Sundays, but don't go away. Catch up on more recaps right here, right now.
Until next time, take care.